There's always been something interesting to me about films that were initially unsuccessful and then many years later kind of found their audience and became cult classics. Now, one such movie is the slasher horror My Bloody Valentine. Now, I've got a little bit of an admission to make to you guys. I'm not the world's biggest 80s horror slasher fan. It's not that there's anything specific that I dislike about the genre. In fact, there isn't anything that I actually dislike about the genre in general. It's just that I think when those movies were in vogue, I kind of missed that bus a little bit, probably because I was a little bit too young. I only got into the horror scene around about the mid-90s, and by that stage, the horror landscape had changed quite a lot. There are movies from the 80s that I actually absolutely love. You know, horror movies such as The Howling, American Werewolf in London, you know, those kinds of movies, or Fright Night. Those movies are 80s classics, but they're not really, I would say, classic slasher movies. So Halloween and Friday the 13th, if I dare say, I kind of never really got into those films, not at first. Even though those movies are really special, they added something very unique to the horror aesthetic. Now, the reason why I'm telling you this is because that's probably why I missed My Bloody Valentine. I've got another admission to make, and this one is really embarrassing, and that is that I did know about My Bloody Valentine, only I knew about the 2009 remake and not the 1981 version. I know that is really, really embarrassing. But this is what's really cool about this channel for me, is that I'm getting the opportunity to rediscover some of the classics from the 80s. For example, I recently watched Halloween and Friday the 13th, and I absolutely loved them. I can't believe I was so indifferent to these movies at first. I kind of like watched them and went, okay, I get it. I get why these movies are so legendary. But I'm also getting this chance to discover, for the first time ever, some of the lesser known classics from the slasher 80s genre. I recently watched The Prowler and Maniac, and I was like, man, these movies are so cool. It's like, I feel like a kid in a toy shop, actually. Now, before that fateful night that I would finally sit down and watch for the very first time ever the horror cult classic known as My Bloody Valentine, I wanted to do a little bit of research first, and I found a couple of interesting things out, at least interesting to me. The first thing is, and I kind of mentioned this, upon its release, My Bloody Valentine did not do well. It was panned by the critics and it had a dismal showing at the box office. I'm not exactly sure, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the movie grossed less than $7 million or something like that. And for a movie of this ilk, that was actually very little. Now, I started wondering about this. Why would a movie that is today rated as one of the greatest slasher movies ever made, how did it simply not resonate with audiences back then? Maybe it had something to do with the fact that we had just come out of the 70s and we had already seen some big horror movies like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Halloween and of course Friday the 13th. Maybe that had something to do with it. And by the way, if you guys do have some information, please let me know in the comments. I'd like to know why you thought this movie didn't do as well as it should have done initially. I also found this out. In some parts of the world, My Bloody Valentine was released literally in the same month as another moderately successful slasher horror movie called Prom Night. Now, for those of you that have not seen that movie, it starred the Scream Queen herself, hot off the success of Halloween, Jamie Lee Curtis. So it could be that this was a contributing factor, that people decided they wanted to watch Prom Night because of Jamie Lee Curtis rather than watching My Bloody Valentine. I know that Prom Night was actually officially released a year earlier, but I know that in some parts of the world they were actually released at the same time. So maybe that had something to do with it. But I think that all of those reasons are a little bit superficial. I'm sure that they contributed in some way. Actually, I think there is more to the story than meets the eye, but I'm going to get back to that a little bit later on. So jumping to the fateful night that I watch My Bloody Valentine for the very first time, I'm excited to watch it. I want to see what all the fuss is about, but I do need to mention one thing. Right before watching My Bloody Valentine, I watched another movie. This is a 1970s psychological horror thriller called Deliverance. Now, I do a very deep dive on this movie in another episode. So if you haven't seen that, go and check it out if you are interested in 70s classic movies. Now, the reason why I tell you this is because I think that watching Deliverance first may have influenced the way that I felt about My Bloody Valentine. It also primed me for some of the, I feel, deeper aspects about that movie. So I watched Deliverance, and I'm very riled up after the movie. I'm kind of thinking about the movie a lot, and I know that I'm simply not going to get to sleep. So I decide to watch another movie. The movie I decide on is, of course, My Bloody Valentine. I mean, if this movie was good enough for Quentin Tarantino, it's definitely going to be good enough for the likes of me. So I sit down, press play on the remote, and the movie starts. And what do I think about the film? I think it's one of the crappiest movies that I've seen in a long time. Up until the 15-minute mark. And that's when my opinion changes. And very quickly. That's when everything starts to make sense. Now, before I tell you about the scene that changed it all for me, let me quickly tell you what My Bloody Valentine is all about, in case you haven't seen it. According to Wikipedia, My Bloody Valentine is a Canadian 1981 slasher horror movie directed by George Milhalka. It is about a group of young adults from a small mining town called Valentine's Bluff, and the town and the young adults decide to throw a very big Valentine's Day prom for the first time in 20 years, only to incur the vengeful wrath of a legendary, almost mythical maniac dressed in mining gear who goes on a bloody killing spree. Now, up until about the 15-minute mark, the film is a connect-the-dots slasher horror movie, at least to me. It opens with a creatively bloody death scene, followed by exposition about the town's fun-loving, naughty youngsters. And then this particular scene pops up. It's set in a bar where the youngsters are very excited about the Valentine's Day party that is about to take place. An elderly barman, played by Jack Van Everen, who had a part in the pioneering slasher classic Black Christmas, which I am going to talk about a bit later, recounts the story of the town's cursed past. Now, there is something unsettling about the way that he tells the story, and also a sort of a gravity in the way that the movie moves into its flashback scene. Now, the flashback scene, or at least the story of the flashback scene, is interesting in a scary kind of way. It is basically about these two superintendents that are very excited about the big Valentine's Day party, so distracted by it that they neglect the mine's safety procedures. So they rush off to the party, and there's a big explosion in the mine that traps in a group of miners. All of them die, with the exception of one individual. This is the person who becomes the film's antagonist. He has to resort to cannibalism and later goes mad, only to return every year on Valentine's Day to go on his killing spree and take revenge. Like I said, the story or the flashback is pretty scary, but it's not this that actually sets My Bloody Valentine apart from the slasher movies before and since 1981. What it is, for me, and I believe the thing that has turned this movie into a cult classic, it's the characters. Those youngsters that I initially judged as being your typical cardboard cutouts that appear in every slasher horror movie that you see. I realized that they are not this. They are indeed the antithesis of the types of youngsters that litter these slasher horror movies. It is in this scene that these characters become real, relatable, working class individuals with their entire lives ahead of them. Except now we know that every single one of them are doomed. Now, on the surface, the film has all the slasher 80s trinkets dangling from it. A film connected to a culturally significant day or holiday, for example, prom night, Halloween, Friday the 13th. There's also the group of youngsters that will inevitably suffer the creative and twisted wrath of a maniacal antagonist. And of course, there's also the cheesy catchphrases, of which one of my favorites in My Bloody Valentine, and this appears in the trailer, and considering the movie's mining backdrop, is in the town of Valentine's Bluff, there are many ways to die. Take your pick. Now, despite its initial critical failure, My Bloody Valentine actually has a lot more to offer than most of its slashing counterparts. It's tightly paced and it's slick, And maybe because I watched Deliverance before I watched this movie, I might have been a little bit more sensitive to the film's deeper themes and also its 70s influence. Now, you guys can tell me if I'm a little bit out to lunch here, I probably am, but the movie actually reminded me a little bit of The Deer Hunter, with its overall depressing feel and its focus on the working class, rather than just the violence and the blood. And speaking about the violence, the death scenes in My Bloody Valentines actually feel angry, almost cathartic, rather than distant and demented. Earlier I spoke about the concept of doomed characters, and Milhalka, and I don't know if he did this deliberately, but he really knows how to play with this idea. He doesn't just treat his characters like walking meatbags about to be hacked up, but he treats them like real people. It's almost as if the director based these characters on people that he actually knew. People with feelings, with texture, with characteristics. And therefore, we feel as if we know these characters and we care for them. He puts them in this depressing little mining town, a town that could be one of thousands in America. A little mining town that feeds into this massive mining system, yet at the same time, the individuals are left forgotten. Out of sight, out of mind. So it kind of leaves me wondering, as I'm sure it did you too, leaves me wondering, what do these characters actually have to look forward to? Yeah, they are young and they have a future, but what kind of a future is it going to be? Is it going to be a future filled with dead-end jobs and stale beer and CD bars? Yeah, these characters are doomed, whether it be at the hands of a sadistic psychopath or simply the harsh reality of the environment that they live in. In focusing on the characters rather than, say, the antagonist, which Milhalka does, he leaves the antagonist to become this almost phantom-like omnipresence. It really makes the movie unsettling and creepy, because we know that the antagonist is there, we just don't know where and we don't know when he's going to reveal himself. This, along with the characters and the real-life setting, as well as the movie's violence and its soundtrack, all give My Bloody Valentine a palpable atmosphere of dread. So in February of 1981, when two slasher movies would be released, Prom Night and My Bloody Valentine, one would go on to be a moderate box office hit, but largely forgotten, while the other would be ignored and later become an unforgettable cult classic. So what did I think of My Bloody Valentine? I'm not sure if I agree with Mr. Tarantino's assessment that it's the greatest slasher horror movie ever made, but I will agree with this 100%. My Bloody Valentine is the most criminally underappreciated slasher movie ever made. I think that it is a film that adds a dark star to the slasher genre, and I'm so glad that I watched it. So to the commenter that suggested that I watch it, thank you very much. And if there are any other 80s slasher movies that you think that I should go out and see, please let me know, because I'll definitely go and watch it. I might even do an episode on it. So thank you very much for watching this episode. I really hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please subscribe to the channel, hit that like, maybe even share. On that note, thank you very much. Have a great week. Stay safe, stay happy, and most of all, stay horror.